We need to talk about a major case that the Supreme Court has just agreed to review, and it could have a serious impact on your constitutional rights. This case is centered on the Fourth Amendment and directly challenges when and how law enforcement can enter your home without a warrant, and whether they can seize firearms during such entries. The case is Case v. Montana, and it's raising serious concerns for anyone who cares about their right to privacy and protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. What makes this case even more important is that it builds upon a previous 9-0 unanimous decision by the Supreme Court in Caniglia v. Strom, which ruled that the community caretaking exception does not justify warrantless entries into someone's home. In that earlier case, the court made it clear that police officers cannot rely on a vague notion of public safety or caretaking duties to bypass the Fourth Amendment. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the opinion, and the court held that seizing Mr. Caniglia's firearms without a warrant inside his home was unconstitutional. The message was simple. The home is protected, and warrantless searches or seizures, especially involving firearms, are not allowed under the so-called community caretaking excuse. Now, in this new case, Trevor Case is arguing that law enforcement violated those very protections. Here's what happened. Case's ex-girlfriend called the police, claiming that he was threatening to harm himself and possibly had a firearm. Police arrived and sat outside his home for approximately 40 minutes before deciding to go inside. They later claimed it was due to an emergency, but Case argues otherwise. Once inside, one of the officers reportedly believed they saw a shadow and thought Case might be reaching for something, and during the encounter, he was shot by police. Afterward, they conducted a search and reportedly found a firearm hidden inside a laundry hamper. Case was later charged and convicted of assaulting an officer during the incident. He has argued that the entire police entry and search were unconstitutional, that there was no active emergency, no imminent threat, and that the search and seizure violated his Fourth Amendment rights. He's seeking to have the firearm and any related evidence suppressed, since it was obtained without a warrant. The lower courts rejected his argument, and the Montana Supreme Court upheld that decision in a 4-3 ruling. The court adopted a legal standard allowing police to enter a home without a warrant if they have an objectively reasonable belief that an emergency exists. The problem is that this standard falls far below probable cause, and Case argues that's not enough when the stakes involve entering someone's home and possibly seizing their firearms. His legal team is pressing the Supreme Court to take a hard look at the standards applied by Montana's courts, specifically whether the so-called emergency aid exception was even justified. After all, if the police believed it was truly an emergency, why did they wait outside for 40 minutes? This case raises an important question. What's the limit of law enforcement's power when it comes to entering homes without a warrant, especially when firearms are involved? One of the most significant arguments raised by Mr. Case and his legal team is rooted in a prior 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court ruling, Caniglia v. Strom. They believe this new case provides the court with an opportunity to clear up the confusion surrounding the exigent circumstances doctrine, especially as it applies to emergency aid exceptions. Since the Caniglia decision was issued, many lower courts have struggled to properly interpret and apply it. According to Case's attorneys, instead of following the Supreme Court's clear guidance, some courts have fallen back on older, less precise standards, essentially defaulting to a broad exigent circumstances analysis. This inconsistency is exactly why Case's legal team argues that the Supreme Court should take up this matter and provide much-needed clarification. To understand the weight of this argument, it's important to revisit what happened in Caniglia v. Strom. In that case, Mr. Caniglia had a heated argument with his wife one evening. During the exchange, he retrieved a handgun, placed it on the dining room table, and reportedly told his wife something along the lines of, "Why don't you just take the gun and shoot me?" Understandably alarmed, his wife left the home and spent the night at a hotel. The next morning, after failing to reach her husband by phone, she grew concerned for his well-being. She contacted law enforcement and returned to the home with police officers. When they arrived, Mr. Caniglia was calmly sitting on the porch. There was no sign of violence, no active emergency. Despite the situation appearing stable, the officers insisted on taking Mr. Caniglia to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. During their conversation, Mr. Caniglia clearly stated that he did not consent to them taking his firearms. The officers reassured him that they would not take the guns. However, after he left in the ambulance, they went back on their word. The officers then spoke to Mr. Caniglia's wife and falsely claimed that her husband had given them permission to retrieve the firearms. Believing them, she agreed. The officers entered the home and seized 2 handguns, all without a warrant and against Mr. Caniglia's expressed wishes. This act led to a major legal battle over whether the police had the right to enter the home and seize firearms without a warrant, especially under the justification of community caretaking. Eventually, the case made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 2021. In a rare and powerful 9-0 ruling, the court sided with Mr. Caniglia. Justice Clarence Thomas, who wrote the majority opinion, emphasized that the Fourth Amendment guarantees a person's right to be secure in their home from unreasonable government intrusion. He made it clear that what might be considered reasonable in the context of vehicle searches does not apply to the home, which has always held the highest level of constitutional protection. This unanimous decision firmly rejected the idea that a vague public safety concern gives police the automatic authority to enter someone's home without a warrant. It was a strong message from the court, and now Mr. Case and his team are pointing to that precedent, urging the court to take the next step and provide clear national guidance on how this applies in emergency aid situations moving forward. The Supreme Court has not reviewed or clarified the limits of when police can enter a home without a warrant under exigent circumstances, community caretaking duties, or emergency aid exceptions since its 2021 ruling in Caniglia v. Strom. That decision firmly limited the government's ability to enter private homes without a warrant. But since then, lower courts have struggled with how to apply it consistently. Now, the Supreme Court has agreed to hear a new case that could allow them to expand or clarify their ruling in Caniglia. This is a major development. The case now before the court brings back into question those very exceptions, particularly whether officers can lawfully enter a private residence without a warrant during emergencies or while carrying out public safety functions, and whether they can seize firearms in the process. This is especially significant because it could affect the protections all Americans have against government intrusion into their homes. The parties involved will now submit detailed legal briefs to the court, and oral arguments are expected to take place during the court's next term. A ruling would likely come before the term ends. This upcoming decision has the potential to shape how the Fourth Amendment is applied nationwide, particularly in cases involving warrantless home entries and firearm seizures. The court's ruling in this case could either reinforce or revise the limits set by Caniglia. Although this new challenge isn't directly about the Second Amendment, it touches on core constitutional protections, including the Fourth Amendment's safeguards against unreasonable searches and seizures. It also raises serious questions. Under what conditions can law enforcement enter your home without a warrant? When can they seize property, including firearms, without consent or judicial approval? These are the questions now before the Supreme Court, and the outcome of this case could have widespread implications. We'll be monitoring this case closely, as it may significantly affect how law enforcement operates and how your rights are protected in future situations. As always, thank you for your continued support. If you found this video informative and would like to support the channel, the best way to do that is by subscribing. Your support truly makes a difference,